Welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at how we can actually work with using Java to read a file into an array of contents. And so this is something that we have a couple teachers and students have been asking questions about this. So I want to demonstrate how we can actually make that happen. So I'm using Eclipse as my IDE right here. You've seen me use this before. And we're going to just take a quick look at the project itself, see how it's set together, and then we're going to go through and actually run this and see what happens. So starting off, as always, we have our runner.java. Runner.java is just the one that starts our project, has the public side void main in it, and that's all it does. It's really boring and we don't care, so we're going to move it and close it out of here. Then we have our file that we're going to be working with for most of our work for this is our controller file, controller.java. You can see I have this in a package system, and so it's in my package demo.controller. If you're using a default package, that's fine. I've just been working with using multiple packages for a while, so that's why I keep doing that even with my demo videos I'm working with. It's just a quick sample demo. We can work with this. And so it has a package statement right there at the top saying where it belongs inside the Java. And we have our public class controller class file. I can see right here we have 3 methods in here. I have 2 public methods and 1 private method. Again, making sure that the responsibilities of different things are handled in small quantities so we can go through and see it just as we need to and go from that. And so we have our public void start, we have our private void read file, and we have our public void handle error. You can see the code that's inside the array. That will go in more detail on that in just a minute when we see what's happening with that. Where the work of this is going to happen inside our IOController, because that's where we're actually going to do the work for this. But again, we want to make sure that we put the work where it belongs, not just all at once. And so making small little piles of code makes life so much easier to understand and makes working with our code so much easier over the long run. So we want to make sure we practice that. Now, what we're working with specifically is we're working with a file from the Corgis dataset project. If you haven't worked with the Corgis dataset project, they are amazing. There's lots of really cool data on there, and it's free and publicly available data that you can use and work with. And it's got some great stuff. And so I picked wind turbines as the data source we're working with. And so as you can see right here, it is a large CSV file with lots of contents. We've got lots of information here. We've got lots of information inside that CSV file. And it's a CSV file or a comma separated volume. So it has lots of information here. You can see that we have some quotes around different things. So we have IA, Story County 2017, 3000, 87.5, 125.0, 1227, 1.85, 155, blah, 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 blah. And then some information right there. So we've got lots of information that's on there. We've got lots of that. And you can see right here, I've got a lot of information. Now, if I go down and use command down to go all the way to the bottom, you can see I've got 63,962 rows of information. There is no way you want to be typing this in yourself. And this is why we have computers, because we use computers so we can take the boring work out of our life and do the fun stuff, the analysis, the critical problem solving. And we can use that by using tools like code to make that happen. So we don't have to actually worry about doing that. So I'm going to close that CSV file because we don't need to have that open anymore. And let's go ahead and see how we can actually read that into the array and see what we can make happen. So the next file we want to look at is the IOController.java file. Again, when you're looking at code, you want to make sure that you split the responsibilities of code into the piles that it's working with. This is where you want to use your ability to talk to your ducks. So I've got this really great duck right here, nice little evil death duck right here, and my cute little goth duck right here that can talk to and ask questions about when we're working with this. And so we can talk to the ducks and ask them questions, and we can use them as we go through that to make sure that we understand what's being worked on and how we can actually solve those problems. But when we're working this, we have some things we have to work with. The first thing we have to do is we add our imports for our file. We have a scanner we have used to actually work with files or text. You may have worked with that already. We also have to import java.io.file and java.io.file.found exception. Those exceptions are the things that can happen if we don't actually see that file in there. Now I'm making a public class IOController because again, in Java, we use classes to hold our stuff together. The first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at the signature of our method itself. And so our method signature starts out with public, which means of course it can be seen elsewhere. Then we have the static keyword. You may not have used the static keyword, but the static keyword says that, hey, I want to access this method in a way that's not as much object-oriented. I want to say, hey, use the container that's holding this and tell it to do this action. And so it's like, oh, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And so this is a static method. It means I don't create an instance of IOController. I just say, hey, IOController, use that method. In this case, read into string array. And it returns a string array, which is the return type specified after the static keyword. And then of course, we see the read into string array. The name of the method describes what it's gonna do. And then in the signature part, excuse me, and then in the parameters sequence of our signature, we can see that we have 3 different parameters. And in a static method, everything that we need has to be sent in via parameter because it doesn't have any state. It doesn't know anything about what's inside itself. It just says, hey, this is the information you give me. This is what I can use. And so static methods have that as their structure. The first parameter that we have inside our signature is the string path. This is just saying, hey, this is where the file is located. We're using a file path for that. And we're going to send that information to the method so it can open that file. Our next parameter is the line count because again, we're working with an array, so we have to know how big we're going to be. So we have to know that in advance. And we saw that when we looked at the file just a minute ago in wind_turbines.csv, we saw how many lines are inside that. So we have that information we can send to that right there. And then finally, we have a reference to the controller because we want to have, in case we have an error message, we have to handle that with it. And that's handled not inside the IOController, but rather in the actual main part of the project, because that's where the errors will be handled inside our code. Our first line that we have is we're going to declare our array. And so string array contents is a new string array. Oh, okay, cool. How big is it going to be? It's going to be line count big. So that parameter we use is used to initialize how big the array we're going to be working with is. Then we also initialize a variable, a local variable called current line. It's an int, and we assign it to be 0. And we want to use that because we're going to go through and actually read through the rows over that. And then we're going to use a try with resources block. And a try with resources block is what we have to do when we're working with code that we want to make sure that we can attempt to make it the code. The code will compile. It's great. It's wonderful. But we also want to make sure that we properly close the resources attached to that code. And so a scanner should be closed when you're done using it. And what the try with resources block does is it says, hey, scanner implements a interface called auto-closable, which means it'll close it for itself if we put it inside the parens of a try with resources block. So it'll do that for us. So it's a little bit of good lazy code. Syntactic sugar, it might be called as well. And so we're going to create a scanner in there. We're going to call it text scanner again. I mean, things are just very boring, but it describes exactly what's going to happen. And that scanner is going to be initialized, creating a new file from the path we specified, again, from that signature of the original method itself. So we're going to create a new scanner from the path that's located. And inside that, we'll put a while block. While blocks when we don't know how long we're going to do. And so we're going to use that compound piece of logic right here. And while the text scanner has next line, so there is more lines to be read, and the current line count is less than line count, we're going to go through and read all those things in. And we'll update that variable as we go through. And so contents sub current line is going to be assigned the value of text scanner.nextLine. So we'll read one line in, text scanner next line, and assign it into the contents array at the current line index. And then current line will increment, so we go through and we fill and populate each row in the array. If there are any errors when we're doing this, if say, for example, we give it the wrong path, we will catch a file not found exception, and that error will be sent in and sent to the handle error method. Or if we do some other thing, and that exception, that generic exception, will be handled afterwards, it's going to do the smaller thing, and then we broaden out to more general errors to handle that, and we'll handle that error as well. And last, but certainly not least, we return the contents of that to our structure. So go ahead and save that right there. And so we'll go back over here. And so in controller, we have our read file method. So we're going to start off with this, and we're going to use a static method to access that IOController's file reading. And so we declare first our file contents array, the string array right there. And then we're going to assign the IOController reading a string array, the windturbines.csv, and 0 in this. So we're going to say, hey, I'm going to send in how many rows it's going to have. I'm going to say 0. And I'm using this as reference to the controller because that's what it takes as a parameter. So I'm talking about this controller right here. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and send out the information to that, and we'll go from there. So stringing out file names and the contents.length right there is what we're going to put out from that. And if we have the error, it says, oh, there was an error, and it prints the stack trace to go with that. So let's go ahead and we'll demo this right now with 0, and we'll play that right there. And contents count 0, and the contents of it is a Java array. Oh, that's really helpful. It's not really saying very much. It just says, oh, what's in there? Oh, okay. So that really doesn't really say what's inside that. Let's modify that line right here so we can actually see what's inside here. And do a for loop, and for index equals 0. Index is less than, and we'll do file contents.length. And index goes plus plus, squigs, and then we'll do system.out.println, and we'll do file contents subindex. That will actually tell us more what's inside that. Now it's going to be a bit more helpful than that, so we'll delete that whole line right there because that's really not that helpful. Boom. Okay, so now we have a way to actually go through and see what's inside there. Rerun that one more time, make that just a little bit better. And contents line count 0, and there's nothing else printed after that because there's nothing inside that, because it's just an empty array of 0. Let's go ahead and change that to be 10 rows. Make that just a really quick thing. So we'll do that right there, and we'll hit play, and we'll hit OK again. And now we can see that we print out all the first 10 rows of that structure. Oh, that's pretty useful. Great. Now let's go back over here to that windturbines.csv. Right-click, open with plain text editor. And it had how many rows? 63,962. So instead of 10, 63962. And we'll hit play on that. And OK. And boom, we have now 63,000 rows of text. Definitely don't want to type that in yourself. This is why using computers is so amazing. But wait, what if we gave it a wrong number? So if I say, for example, I give it -1. That's a valid number, right? Ah, crash. Read a static field, exception in thread main. Negative array size exception -1. So that exception was caught, and it's like, oh, we have a problem with that. We can't create that array. And so, boom, we have that crashing and burning right there. Or if I give it a file that's too big, 100,000. There we go. And I hit play again, and I have nulls, but it didn't crash because I used the catch on that exception to make sure that was happening. So again, if we want to look at how we can actually read into an array, we have to make sure we send the length of the array. We create the array at that line length right there for that. And of course, we want to make sure we read that type of it. If you want to do more complex than actually read the actual contents of that, of course, you have to use the .split method, split the array into its split that line into its different components, and then teach each of those components to go into a separate array like that. And you can go that as well. You can also take this a little bit further and use an array list if you want to do something even more with that, where you can dynamically read the contents of the structure. Check out some of my other videos on how to do that, but I hope this is helpful. Cheers. See you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.